Good evening, everyone, and a really warm welcome to the Fifth Estate tonight at the Wheeler Centre. My name is Sally Warhaft. Just before I introduce our guest, I just wanted to apologise about my voice, which has given up on me a bit. But I'm sure I've got an hour in me, and I'm going to give it everything I've got. But I hope it's not an irritant to you, as it is to me, because these conversations are about tone, and diplomats know this. When you can't get the feeling behind the words you want to say, you're missing something. So I hope it comes to me, to my voice tonight. It's an absolute pleasure to have our guest tonight, the Ambassador of Ukraine to Australia, Vasyl Myroshnychenko. And look, prior to diplomacy, he was a partner in a communications company, a co-founder of Ukraine Crisis Media Centre, an NGO aimed at amplifying Ukraine's voice internationally. He has a Master's in Politics of the World Economy from the LSE, which I imagine is fairly handy as well. Please give him a big, warm Wheeler welcome. Vasyl, because we have some time this evening, I want to ask a bit about your personal story and your path to diplomacy, because you were chosen to be the ambassador just 2 weeks before the Russian invasion.
Thank you, Sally. Firstly, sorry, I was a bit late. I was actually on my flight from Wellington just several hours ago, and I think that's the first time I've done, actually. I spoke today in the morning in Wellington at 9 a.m. at a big conference, New Zealand Institute of International Affairs, and I was doing another talk tonight in Melbourne. So 2 countries across the Tasman Sea. If you see me drop dead, call the emergency.
You can just pick us both up off the stage. Yeah.
So make sure I don't die here on stage, because it's not going to be lots of headlines, good for media, but I don't think it's good for Ukraine. Yeah, Sally, I actually was appointed 2 weeks after the invasion. So I was in the middle of my appointment when the Russians invaded Ukraine. And in a way, my path to diplomacy is different from a usual path. So technically, I'm considered a political appointee because I'm not a career diplomat. And in different countries, there are different traditions of political appointments, but there are usually 3 ways of how you can become an ambassador, right? One is you're a politician, you're in the government, you're a minister, and your leader wants to get rid of you. He or she appoints you as an ambassador, right? And you go and send out
to
overseas.
Australia, yeah.
Correct, any other country, right? Another one is you're a close friend of the president. Like Ambassador Caroline Kennedy, she's a personal friend of Joe Biden, and he appointed her as an ambassador to Australia, for instance, right? Or you donate lots of money to a political party which wins the elections, and then as a way to thank you, you are sent to a nice country to work as an ambassador, and you're a wealthy businessman. It's very typical in America. A lot of postings to Europe, to like Western Europe, are political, basically. They could be also former politicians, but some that are just donors, rich people who become, friends of whoever president is in office. You don't have this tradition here in Australia. You mostly stick to either former politicians or career diplomats. So in my case, I was neither one of those. So I didn't tick any box. So I was a bit different. And in a way, my story was that I was educated to become a diplomat. And in those days, I went to uni in 98. So it was already, Ukraine was independent for 7 years. But our university system was still very Soviet, right? And to go into diplomacy, to have a career in diplomacy, you had to go only to one university. There was only one university in Kyiv where you could learn international relations. And that was your way into diplomacy, right? Because our training is different from your training, because you learn a lot on the job. So you qualify for DFAT, and then you actually learn everything on the job. So you can have a degree in law, in economics, politics, doesn't matter, and then you kind of get in there and then you learn it on the job. In our system, which still was a Soviet system, still remains the same thing, by the way, it hasn't changed much. You actually, for 5 years, trained to be a diplomat, right? So we had like lots of history of the 20th century, so history was the main subject, world history. Then we had a lot of international law, international economics, and then we actually had to do classes like diplomatic etiquette and protocol. I had to sit an exam on how to actually do the sitting at the table, how do you eat at the table, and how do you eat standing at the table. And I had to do an exam in that. I forgot everything, by the way. It's been 25 years ago.
I hope it helps you here.
I never needed that, actually, but the system was that rigid, so you actually had to then, for instance, diplomatic correspondence. So you write a TPA, a third-party note. That's a document which officially embassies communicate with the foreign ministries. So we had to learn how to write them back at the university, and you would write an exam doing it. And I remember, and I was also trained as a military interpreter, and I was trained as an interpreter. And so we had a class in diplomatic correspondence, and we had this very rigid teacher who was a colonel in the KGB in the old times, and she was very tough on us. So she made us memorize Vienna Convention on Consular Relations by heart. Google it, and you will see it, how many pages is there. You just had to memorize it, go on stage, and deliver it. And that was kind of training, right? But then I got married when I was 21, and I kind of didn't have an option to go into foreign service, so I went into business.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the time just before the invasion, and because it concerns themes that I think are still just as relevant, and they're the themes of hope and fear. And right up into the Oval Office, in fact, President Biden at the time, he was sceptical about whether Russia would really invade. He didn't quite believe what his people were telling him. And I know that in Ukraine that was true as well. I want to ask what you felt was going to happen beforehand and about that tension between hope and fear.
Well, that's a very good question, Sally. So I'll just talk about my personal ones, because no point of talking about different leaders. You all can Google it and see what they were saying. So pretty much starting, because as you remember, Russia's concentration of the Russian troops on the border, there were two stages of that. The first stage was actually in spring of 2021, if I'm not mistaken. So the risk of invasion was much earlier. But then it kind of like dispersed. So they said, oh, we're here for military exercises in Belarus and on the border. And they then kind of disappeared. And then there was a huge concentration of the troops back again in the European autumn, getting closer to November. So it was like as if they had a different plan, then they delayed it, and then they came back. A lot of that was also exacerbated by the disastrous withdrawal of the American troops from Afghanistan, also kind of, upcoming elections in France. In a way, Germany was out there finishing the second Nord Stream 2, getting ready to buy more of Russian gas. So it looked like very solid for Russia in terms of like an opportunity to do it. But then, we saw the troops, we kind of read lots of stories, and I was not part of the government at that stage yet, but my appointment started in December, actually. It usually takes about 6 months to get appointed as an ambassador. It's not quick. So it all started, and I was kind of doing other stuff. Actually, in January, I took my company to a corporate event to Egypt. So 30 people, we have this annual corporate event. That's the cheapest summer you can buy when you live in Ukraine. You jump on a plane, just only 4 hours, and you have summer there, beautiful corals underwater. So it was like 3 or 4 day event, but it was already end of January, so like really 1 month before the invasion. And I remember I had that feeling like I was in Egypt and I felt like, what if Russians invade now? My whole family is in Kyiv. I'm going to get stuck here in Egypt. What do I do, right? And that was kind of, in a way, it was petrifying. It was like a nightmare, basically, because I figured, look, I mean, you don't care about your life, right? But you care about the life of your kids. And that was a bit petrifying. But then at the same time, I did some events and I participated in some discussions. Starting from end of January, I got requests for several interviews. I did an interview with Canadian public broadcaster. I also did an interview with someone else. I don't remember who was it. Generally, kind of basically, because I was providing comments to media in the past, they were just interesting just as a regular guy, basically. What do you think, right, as a businessman? And then I did also an event, which was actually very interesting, an event with the American Chamber of Commerce in Poland. Because a friend of mine, Polish friend, he was on the board, and he said, let's have a discussion. And we have a discussion about what if Russians invade, what's going to happen. And I remember I was talking about this millions and millions of refugees, which I didn't believe was going to happen. So I said, well, look, you see, and as you remember, Russians were using some of the refugees from Middle East. They brought them to the border with Poland and Belarus, and also some Middle East, but also Africa as well. And they actually tried to weaponize those migrants. So they would forcefully try to basically send them to Poland, while Poland was like not letting them in. And Russians were saying, you see, Poles do not respect human rights. They don't let refugees in. But that was part of the Russian military intelligence kind of operation to discredit Poland, to take them as a, this country which doesn't take refugees, so then don't stick to the, convention on the protection of refugees. But anyways, so that was that kind of discussion, and we're discussing that, those instances in Belarus, orchestrated by the Russians. And then I said, look, you see those migrants from Syria who came? And we were talking about 1 million at least refugees who came, post-2015. I said, if Russians invade Ukraine, you're going to see millions and millions of Ukrainians in Poland and many more in Europe. While I was saying that, I didn't believe that it was going to happen. I stayed in Kyiv until the last day. And I didn't think it was going to happen. It was like, why would I leave? I'm so, cool when I believe everything is going to be fine. And only those who cowards only leave Kyiv. And it's actually, nobody left. Very few people left. Out of my friends, only I think 2 have gone to Lviv in Western Ukraine. And that was about it. Everybody was in Kyiv.
There's a gripping account in John Lyon's book of you getting your family, your wife and children to Romania and then turning back to go to Kyiv and continue your work. We're now in the 4th year of this war, and there was an attack last night in Kyiv with 440 drones, 32 missiles. It wasn't headline news today, though, because the list of things now competing for people's attention is so vast and terrifying. Can you tell us what daily life is like now for Ukrainians?
Well, it depends on where you go. Ukraine is a big country.
Yes.
So largest
Perhaps
country in
say
Europe.
Kyiv.
Look, Kyiv has been very tough, I would say. The last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, Kyiv has not seen so many attacks since the outbreak of the war. So the intensity of those attacks is just immense. Because I'll just give you one example. So last year, when Russians would launch 30 drones and 12 missiles at Ukraine, at different targets in Ukraine, we would call it a massive attack. Now they sent 440 drones and 32 missiles only at one city, Kyiv. There were many other drones and missiles which they sent to other cities. And so next year they will be able to send 1,000 drones per day at a time, overwhelming our air defense and making it very difficult. Because, the way new technology is developing, originally we had an edge in autonomous systems, but Russians have quickly caught up, right? And they now have as many drones as we have, and now drones are the main weapons, and they can send them in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And that becomes quite tough because people just don't sleep, and deprivation of sleep is a form of torture. So imagine waking up, or not sleeping for at least 3-4 hours at night, and then you have to still go do some business next day, right? Which people do actually. So it's kind of a bit bizarre because, well, today, it was horrible. I don't know how many, the casualties that were announced, they're growing now. So I think on my way in, I saw that 19 people died, but 70 got injured. But I think in several hours, we'll actually hear more about who died because Kyiv is a densely populated city. Before the war, we had 3.5 million people. So even if we now only have 2.5, it's still a lot of people, right? And when you basically send those drones in a densely populated area, and they're gonna hit and kill people and kids and everybody. So but people wake up. And then go to work. They go and have a coffee at their coffee place. They go to a restaurant and have a dinner or lunch. They go to a concert. It's a bit bizarre, but I think it was the same it was in the Second World War. People were having parties in the Second World War. And they were just entertaining themselves as much as they could while the war was ongoing. And I think, that's probably a psychological protection for people because life goes on, right? You can get killed, but in a way, you never know who's going to get hit. I mean, you can leave this building and get hit by a car, and the probability of that is pretty much the same one as the one that you're going to get killed by a drone in Ukraine. But just understanding the feeling of that, and this is just purely probability theory, but the fact that you can be one of those who can get killed, sleeping at night, and the drones, there were video footage, just horrendous, where they just hit residential buildings. So basically, if it hits into your window, and you are there sleeping, and all your family is dead for sure.
Vladimir Putin is obviously on a mission, and some things seem clear about what he wants, a return to past glory. Do you feel like through the war with Ukraine that he is at war with the whole West?
Yeah, I mean, if you read Russian media, which I read, not that I want to, but or not that I have to actually sometimes just to read it. And if you follow the narrative for the domestic audience in Russia, you will find out that actually Russians are just fighting back. So the way Russians perceive this war is that they are under attack. So evil West, this gay Europe, that decadent West, which is, had no moral values, is trying to destroy a Russian Orthodox world of people of traditional values, people of faith, those who are fighting for God. In the past, Russians called it special military operation, but as of 8 weeks ago, they started saying that it's a sacred war. The reason they say sacred war is because they already have 1 million casualties, killed or wounded. 1 million Russian casualties. So even for a dictator, it's very difficult to maintain the spirit of fighting. So the way Russians perceive this is actually they're just rescuing Ukrainians and saving poor Ukrainians who got, kind of misled by evil NATO and other Western countries. And actually, Ukraine does not exist, and it's a fake country, and there is no nation like Ukraine. So it must be Russia, and it is Russia, as if you read his essay in 2021. So, it's so extraordinary that Putin actually written that I encourage you to read his essay from 2021, where he actually says, well, Ukraine does not exist, it's not a country, it's Russia, we're going to invade it. And he basically was very frank about it. Everybody read the article and said, oh, Vladimir Putin, you're so good. And then he would basically deliver that. And nobody could stop him, and that's the whole point. So the question is, why the deterrence didn't work? Why? What was out there that emboldened him? And I can give you an answer.
Please.
Well, firstly, he invaded Georgia in 2008. After Georgia, America launched a reset policy with Russia. Remember that Lavrov Clinton photo? Reset policy, перезагрузка in Russian, those of you who speak Russian, the picture, they do this перезагрузка. So he invaded 20% of Russian territory, and Americans start a reset policy, right? He felt, well, that's good. Then he invades Ukraine, 2014, kills many Ukrainians, occupies Crimea, and just starts a war in Ukraine. And everybody said, oh, no, it's not a war, it's something different, it's maybe it's war, maybe not, it's hybrid war. It's not real. I mean, it's just, we don't know who these people are. They just have a uniform, but they don't have an insignia. But I think it was pretty clear. Even Americans knew that those were Russian military intelligence, that it was a war. And then they shot down MH17, killed 38 Australians on board, and many other civilians who were there, right? And not much has happened, actually. The sanctions were imposed on Putin were very, weak. I mean, they were not real. And everybody was like, okay, let's just forget about it, and let's just do business with Russia. Russia is buying so many luxury cars. We need their gas. Russia is so good, just good people. We love their literature. Tolstoyevsky, as we call it in Ukrainian. Tolstoyevsky, do you know this term? Tolstoyevsky? So there is Dostoevsky and there is Tolstoy. In Ukraine, we call it Tolstoyevsky. We mixed two names, and we call it Tolstoyevsky, right? And basically, yeah. And then he felt like, okay, I probably can take over Ukraine entirely, and everybody's just going to watch me doing it. And actually, that was what was going to happen, because if he succeeded in capturing Kyiv and killing Zelenskyy, this is what would have happened. If Zelenskyy left the city, he would have occupied entire Ukraine. Because people don't understand, Putin does not want any territory. He wants entire Ukraine.
Is there a resistance within Russia, a peace movement that you know?
I'm not aware of that, to be frank. Probably not. For different reasons. Firstly, I mean, maybe there are some Russians in the room here, so I need to, because I speak Russian, not because I speak Russian, because I was forced to learn Russian. I was colonized by Russia. And when I was a kid, I had no books in Ukrainian, though I only spoke Ukrainian. So it was part of being colonized by the country. And languages are very different, by the way. If you speak German, so Ukrainian and Russian is like Dutch and German, 62% similarity, 62. Our similarity with Polish is 68%. So we're closer to Polish than we are to Russian, right? Just because we use Cyrillic, people think it looks like Russian. It's not. So, and that's, the same as Deutsch and Dutch. Deutsch and people get confused. It's two separate languages. But anyways, the thing is that the way Russians are petrified, firstly, so they're scared because it's a dictatorship. If you protest too much, you go to jail. If you don't want to go to jail, you just keep your mouth shut, right? Then you get you paid well, so the money that they get when they go and fight is the money they've never seen in their life. If they die, their families get so much money they've never seen in their life. 7 million rubles, they've never seen that in their life. So Russians just pay for everything, right? And I think it was Putin who actually the other day, there was a famous quote there which he said, and Mark Adel is here in the room, he will correct me if I'm wrong. So he said something like, well, it was in Russian, but I'll do it in English. He basically, I don't remember the words exactly. So your man, and when he was basically, when saying your man, he was addressing this rural Russia, which is very poor Russia, very underdeveloped. Your man, they have two choices. They can die as alcoholics, or they can die as heroes. And they have to make a choice. So that was kind of a similar wording which Putin used when he was talking about it. And when I heard it, it was like, wow, that's Russia. I mean, that's really Russia. And it's a different mentality. It's a different culture. A lot of that was actually influenced by Mongol Tatars in the 13th century, which basically then the creation of Moscow was created. Well, Ukraine was a different story, and Kyiv and everything, we had a different history. And therefore, we were very different people, though, we then were part of the Russian colony for a long time. So it's an interesting kind of field. But of course, there are people who are resisting. There are exceptions, right? Navalny was one of those, but again, there are many questions to Navalny. As you know, Navalny did not support, he basically, when he was asked the question, what about Crimea? He said, well, Crimea is not a sandwich, we can't give it back. He, of course, then being already in jail, he said, well, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have said it, I was disillusioned, and that he kind of recognized many years later that he shouldn't have said it, but he did say it. So in a way, if you also look at what Russian exiles talk about, you will be surprised, because all the those who are exiled, they talk about, we should lift sanctions on Russia. Because from those sanctions, common Russian people are suffering. And the sanctions don't work, so we must lift all the sanctions on Russia. And my question is, why do they say that? how is it going to help common Russians? It's only helping the regime, because basically the regime is trying to prove that sanctions don't work, but they do work actually. And what we need to do is we need to strengthen those sanctions. We need to make the price of oil not $60 per barrel, but make it 45. Lower the price cap, because as you know, Australia, European Union, many other countries are buying Russian oil. So as long as you keep on buying their oil, Russians will be funding this war.
There are two front lines. There's the war itself and there's the international stage. I want to turn to those international relations at the moment. Obviously, the treatment of your president in the Oval Office was one of the most disgraceful things I've ever seen, really. It was just astonishing. I wonder, what you made of that, but also what the consequences, did something shift with that meeting that you are all still trying to handle?
Look, I think it's, there was so much in the media about it in the past, it's not worth delving on that again. What's important now is, another meeting which I really liked was a meeting in St. Basilica, because I think that was very special. I heard the rumor that actually President Trump, it was his idea to do that meeting, and he wanted that picture of him sitting with Zelenskyy on the floor,
What a great photo.
It's like a movie.
Amazing.
It's like a movie. And I think, or reality show, right? And the whole world was watching that. And soon after, we were able to sign that minerals deal, which originally was supposed to be signed in the Oval Office on that night. And that kind of got some us going, right? So it was a good meeting, followed by a good deal that we signed. As you know, part of the deal is, it was part of our offer, by the way. It was not what America wanted. President Zelenskyy offered that to Trump, and he saw him in September in 2021 in New York. We have some of those minerals. As you know, every country has minerals. We have some of those. You have more than anybody else, by the way. But the problem is not the minerals. The problem is processing of those minerals, which is a bottleneck, right? Nobody wants to process minerals because they pollute your environment. So therefore, you keep it in China. And so that China just pollutes himself. But then China just got it all. And now they have a monopoly on the rare earth. And no, they don't have a monopoly on critical minerals, but they do, in processing in many respects. So the goal of America and Europe is to diversify the supply of critical minerals and rare earth minerals to Europe, to America, to other countries. You're trying to do it here in Australia as well, but it's not that easy because it's all very capital intensive. It's all very, very tech oriented, and at the end of the day, it's long term.
We just like to bucket everything out.
Correct, but but you now do some processing here, especially on rare earth, because there's certain rare earth elements like scandium, for instance, or antimony, which is very much in demand by defense industry. And when only China is making that, it's a high dependency which you need to avoid, in addition to all the other magnetic metals which are used in renewables and whatnot, right? In all the gadgets, you need magnetic metals, right? But the thing is, you need to find the deposit, the minerals, you need to get it out of the ground, you need to process it several stages, and then you need to chemically process it before you're going to get a final product, before you can deliver it. So it's it may take 10, 20 years before you get there, and then volatility on the prices of the commodities is very high. And when one country has a monopoly, they can dump the market and the prices will drop and the company will go bankrupt. This is what they've done with all other competitors in the world. So the problem for those companies to survive is to have access to cheap capital and to have access to public finances, basically, to withstand the tumultuous times when Chinese are dumping the market. So it's a bit complicated. Sorry, I've been traveling to Perth too much, and they've been educating me about those rare earth elements. A fascinating city, by the way. I'm not sure you've been there, but long flight, though.
Almost all roads lead back to the White House, though, for Ukraine. We've got a situation now where, President Trump wants to solve the problem in Gaza. He wants to solve the problem between Israel and Iran. How has the sudden elevation of a sense of danger and conflict around the world, it's never felt like this to me in my lifetime from Australia, the sense of chaos in the world. How does that affect what you need to do for your conflict?
Well, it's all interconnected, and certainly another big war between Israel and Iran now is not going to help us. Certainly, Iran is not a friend of Ukraine, as you know. I mean, they've been supplying Russians with Shahed drones in large numbers, and they've been cooperating on the defense industry with the Russians. So they're no friends of ours, right? So that's a fact. Nevertheless, a war of that scale is going to definitely distract America. And now imagine, so we had Gaza, Israel, now we have Israel, Iran, Russia's waging the biggest war in Europe. You know, Russians have deployed 650,000 troops in Ukraine. So, by the way, there was an interesting observation. So when Iran retaliated the other day, it was all the headlines. Iran retaliates with, 100 drones or something, right? And I'm like, okay, this is just only 40% of drones that Russians send daily, on the daily basis at Ukraine. Only 40%. It doesn't make headlines anymore, by the way. So it became normal that Russians sending those 200-300 drones per day, and nobody cares. It's never in the media. Because it's just routine now, because it's no surprise. Of course, when Iran retaliated, it's just big news because it's the first time it happened, right? So of course, I mean, imagine something happens now in the Indo-Pacific, how stretched America is going to be. But by the way, it looks like it's a perfect opportunity for somebody who wants to go and be a bit adventurous, because having a war in Europe, having the war in the Middle East, well, let me tell you, if there is a war in the South China Sea, hope
South
not.
Asia too.
No, exactly. So when it's going to be, America will have to choose, right? Where do they commit? Indo-Pacific, Europe, or Middle East? And what's the impact at you actually in this whole thing? And I just got back from New Zealand, where I spent about 8 days, and I think it's no matter what happens, it's a lose-lose for you. Even if you don't participate in any of that, which is hard to imagine, all your trade is with China, with Japan, and South Korea, 60% of that, right? If anything happens and you just stay neutral, even if there is no war, kind of like kinetic war, but there is kind of a blockade of Taiwan or something, I mean, the whole trade is going to be paralyzed. Chinese will probably block Malacca Straits. You won't be able to get your fuel. The trade will be blocked. So the question is, how long Australian economy can last without being able to sell to China, for 6 weeks, for 8 weeks, or not getting the, petrol from Singapore, right? So it's even if you just stay out of everything. I mean, you're going to get impacted one way or another. And of course, I hope it doesn't happen. And I'm here to scare anybody. I'm just looking. Nobody thought Israel would do what they did to Iran, and then another war is starting. So it's not something that you can anticipate or actually predict, because you can't. I mean, though we knew that Russians were invading, Biden was actually very clear on that 2 weeks before the invasion. He said Russians are invading, while Germans and French did not believe that it was going to happen. And actually, funny story, the chief of the German intelligence service was on the eve of the night in Kiev when it all happened.
Right.
He had to be, evacuated from Kiev. He was fired very soon after. But it was just, and I could never understand it, why, all the NATO countries sharing intelligence, they wouldn't believe the Russians, so they believed in their own intelligence, and they were convinced it was not going to happen.
Well, it gets me back to that point about hope and fear.
Yeah.
And when hope gets in the way, sometimes of things that need to be done. Can it get in the way? What do you do with your hope?
Oh, that's a good question. We have a famous Ukrainian poet, Vasyl Myroshnychenko, and she said that ми сміялися, щоб не плакати, which means we laughed not to cry. And I think, Vasyl Myroshnychenko is one of those Ukrainian poets who talks a lot about hope. She's got a whole series of poetry called Contra Spero, which in Latin means I keep my hope without a hope. Please correct me if I did it right. Без надії сподіваюсь. Marco?
Hoping against hope.
Correct. We have a professor of Ukrainian literature here.
Thank you. Lucky.
So thank you, Marco.
I moderated an event a couple of weeks ago with an Israeli hostage negotiator, a very senior guy, and the shadow Fatah leader for a Palestinian. And I asked them, I said, you know, a lot of Australians are protesting, they want their voice heard. Is this helpful? And they laughed and said, they both agreed. They said, there is nothing that can happen in Australia, nothing that is going to affect what is going on for us over there. I thought I would ask you, you know, the same question, because I suspect it's a different answer, but does what ordinary Australians do or want to do, how does it matter? Really?
Can you please repeat the question? What was the question, about the war in Ukraine or?
With protest, when people in Australia want to do something to show how they feel about this conflict, does it have any real impact at all?
It does. It does. Look, you're a vibrant democracy. I mean, I was watching your elections in admiration, by the way. It was so interesting to watch your elections. Because when I arrived here 3 years ago, I didn't know anybody. So I didn't really understand the debate, the discourse. And now in 3 years that I pretty much met every prominent politician in Australia, it was, you know, like watching Insiders is like watching a reality show, because, you know, I'm texting those politicians from different parties, by the way. If they do a good job, I say, oh, that was good, by the way. And then, if, you know, so it's kind of, because you have that connection now to the country, which I, you know, very blessed to have in these 3 years, that I've met many people, learned about your history, culture, language, you know, and you know, this is how you, no, there is a reason why diplomats don't serve only 4 years, right? Because they get attached too close to your country, and then they send you back because they believe that you forget who you work for, right? So that's the only reason why all diplomats are rotated, because after 3 years, you start loving your hosting country so much that the capital believes you're already working for the country where you posted, not for the country you represent. So they send you back, you know, so that you can ground you for 2 years and then send you elsewhere. And that's kind of the logic of rotation in diplomatic service. But, you know, for me, I think you have a robust democracy. You have a great country, very lucky, rich country, prosperous country, flourishing, you know, great, kind people, very, you know, I fell in love with Australians. When I came here, I had no clue about you, to be frank. I mean, I lived in America for a year, I lived in London for a year, and I spent about 3 months in Canada. So I figured I could get by with my English until I heard, you know, Aussie slang. It took me a while to figure it out. But then I kind of, oh, that's actually pretty cool. I mean, everything is shorter, you know, all these words and whatnot, and all the nicknames and everything. So no. But apart from that, I think that what's important, if you don't like something, you go on a protest, right? And Ukrainian community has been organizing protests in front of the Russian embassy for 3 years and a half, every Saturday. And Ukrainian community in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Adelaide, in Brisbane, they've been doing these rallies every week. I mean, it's not that, you know, maybe 20, 30 people show up. Sometimes they would have hundreds, you know, on anniversary. You know, when we had the 3rd year of the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we had big events in every capital city. So 1,000 people showed up. I think it's very important, because I think protest and a public protest is the best way how you can demonstrate democracy. And, you know, and Ukrainians have taken down 2 presidents, actually. Twice it was the same, actually, Yanukovych. You know, first time in 2004 when elections were rigged, people went to the streets. And then next time in 2013, when he dispersed Ukrainian students who were protesting against his decision to renege on signing the agreement with the European Union on free trade. And then people reacted to that. 1 million people went to the streets and took him down. I mean, it's not history what happened in the Revolution of Dignity for those 3 months. But Ukrainians embrace democracy fully. And this is, democracy is what, when Putin talks about, oh yeah, I'm interested in peace, but we need to eliminate root causes of war, right? And people don't understand what is a root cause of war, right? And so in Putin's propaganda, root cause of war is NATO's expansion to the east, right? But this is all smoke screen, Sally. This is all, sorry, my diplomatic language is all bullshit, and it's the only reason why Russia invaded Ukraine is because a democracy next door is an existential threat to Putin. And he always wanted to invade Ukraine. He always wanted to have Ukraine part of Russia. His plan was very simple. Yanukovych committed and promised to Putin to join Eurasian Customs Union. They actually, in the city of Kaniv, which is a city where our, Ukrainian Robert Burns is buried, Taras Shevchenko, they built this beautiful building. And that building was supposed to host a summit in 2015, Yanukovych as the president, where Ukraine would join Eurasian Customs Union, which was kind of an integration project of Russia, where Ukraine would politically lose its sovereignty by joining a different kind of union, which would be positioned as a competitor to the European Union, right? And that was a plan. So they built like helicopter pads, beautiful, I don't know how many million of dollars they spent. If you go to Ukraine, go to Kaniv, check out that Palazzo Kulture, which Yanukovych built. That was the plan. But then, Revolution of Dignity happened. Putin went on his adventure. He figured, well, I'm going to invade Crimea now. I'm going to invade Ukraine. But that was not his original plan. Then he figured he needed another 8 years to get ready because he needed to beef up his military. And then he came back with a bigger war.
On the battlefront, where the world has admired, or parts of the world have admired so hugely the Ukrainian resistance, there was the recent spider's web, the drone attack. Warfare seems to be changing. There was the Mossad mobile phone use as well recently, the tactics, the devices. What's most important on the front line at the moment, and how's it changed since this began?
It's been phenomenal, actually, in the way we had to embrace new technology to survive and fight. And as they say, war is a mother of innovation. And out of necessity, we had to go there, and we achieved astonishing results. Because in 2022, actually, drones were supplied by volunteers, and they were kind of randomly used by some units, and we were only learning, right? Starting from 2023, the government of Ukraine said, well, actually now we're going to have a policy, and we're going to now actually train people how to use drones, and we're going to buy more drones. And then, 2025. So last year, Ukraine manufactured 1 million drones. This year, we are manufacturing 4 million drones, right? And originally, we had an edge over Russia in terms of drones, but they quickly caught up, supported by Iran and other countries. And there are many smart people in Russia as well, so they just reverse engineered other stuff. And now, innovation cycle in there is about 12 weeks. So whatever we come up with, Russians come up with a countermeasure 12 weeks later. So the way it works, we get lots of different equipment for which we are very thankful from our partners, including from Australia, kind of tanks and ammunition and whatnot, including drones as well, autonomous systems. We then deploy it to the battlefield, and then we see what works, what doesn't. And then the things that work, they don't work long. They work 5-6 weeks. The Russians come up with a countermeasure, and it doesn't work anymore. It's blinded. It's in denied environment. It's very difficult to kind of operate. Then we have to come up with a new thing, right? And then Russians come up with a new countermeasure. But then we incorporate it all. So we have an integrated system, and luckily Ukraine has 300,000 software engineers. So what we now do in the battlefield is just amazing. So we have now a software, basically an application which is integrating battlefield and troops there, R&D, in Ukraine, defense industry company, and the MOD people who kind of facilitate the whole thing. So innovation is happening in real time when for defense industries, the most important thing, you need to test it. And you can't, and sometimes, I mean, some defense industry companies told me they had to wait 12 months before they can even get access to a range to test anything, right? And in Ukraine, it happened in real time. Hence, the technologies that we got from Australia, for instance, a year later is already new technology, and you don't have it, it's only we have it, right? So we are now dominating, us and Russia are dominating in the way we deploy autonomous systems on the ground, underwater, and in the air. By the way, there was also interesting footage, apart from Spiderweb, which was just extraordinary. I mean, it hasn't happened in modern day history. We destroyed 30% of those strategic bombers that Russians had. And one of those bombers, that airfield in Irkutsk, which is quite interesting, was 4,500 kilometers away from the front line. That's the distance from Adelaide to Jakarta. So we managed to deliver the drones, and you read it in the newspapers, and we destroyed it. They were all relying on artificial intelligence. They operated in the totally denied environment, because as you can imagine, those airfields are heavily jammed, and you cannot really fly in anything there, right? This is strategic bombers that can carry nuclear weapons. But we managed to do it, right? And that was like extraordinary. Another thing which happened about 6 weeks ago, a Ukrainian underwater drone went into Novorossiysk, a Black Sea Russian port, and from underwater, it shot down a Russian fighter jet. Sally, this is science fiction. This is science fiction. It never happened before. So, and of course, this is what we did. So now, for the future, our defense industry, and this is where we can help Australia to build your own sovereign defense capabilities. We can help Australian intelligence agencies with asymmetric warfare. Because being small does not mean weak. You can be small and strong. You can be strong because, look, Russians have 140 million people. They cannot subdue a country of 40 million people. And, 500 million people in Europe are asking America of 350 million people to help Ukraine to fight Russia. That's not me, somebody said these numbers. But it's kind of bizarre, right? That it's not about the numbers. It's about your grit, because, Ukraine has a superpower, Sally. You all know the superpower, right? Our superpower is we have no alternative, Sally. If we don't fight, we are done. It's not like, well, if you don't give us weapons, we're gonna agree to peace. No, because peace is not what Russia wants. Russia wants Ukraine destroyed. So we understand what life is going to be under occupation. We know what it's life under occupation. It's going to be horrible, genocide against the Ukrainian people. So we're going to be fighting no matter what. Even if everybody walks away from us, we will keep on fighting because we know what's the alternative. We don't have it.
Is there any space in a situation like that for people and a country to think about its future and how it might rebuild if everything went well enough for that to be happening?
Absolutely. I think, by the way, we've been organizing this annual conference on Ukraine Recovery Conference, and there is a new one coming up in Rome on the 10th and 11th of July, and many different leaders have been invited. It's hosted by Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and President Zelenskyy. And many countries come. It's an annual. Last year it was in Berlin. The year before that it was in London. First year it was in Lugano. So Ukraine Recovery Conference. It's done for business and for governments to come and talk about how that reconstruction and rebuild of Ukraine is going to look like, right? Some things have been fixed already, not at a large scale, but many things have been fixed, especially power generation, electricity grid, kind of critical infrastructure, which Russians continuously destroying. Of course, large-scale deployment of capital will happen after the war is over, right? And this is where I believe there will be plenty of opportunities for Australian businesses to come and make a fortune in Ukraine. I think we have to be very genuine about that, and we have to talk about money. Because as you know, money is what gets everybody going. If the people tell you it's not about the money, don't believe them, it's all about the money. And in a way, I think Australia is very well positioned to help us in the mining sector, to help us in infrastructure development, lots of good engineering companies here, access to capital, renewable energy, and tech industry as well. They already, heavily there. Could be even on the agriculture, but food processing kind of in a way. So there are many different opportunities, and And I think, look, you all know it, this is just official stats. I mean, Australia benefited from this war. And if you look at the prices of commodities, of how they've been changing to the last 3 years, when Russia invaded Ukraine, prices for energy, which means shale gas and coal, just skyrocketed. Prices for iron ore have really skyrocketed. So even if you take the statistics of the first 2 years, I understand the statistics for this year is going to be released or already released in June of your export. So, but I know the numbers for first 2 years. The additional money that your industry was able to make from the sale of commodities resulted in $100 extra billion. Just because Russia invaded Ukraine, it created lots of instability in the market, and prices gone up, right? It's a positive externality for you. You didn't, it's just what happened, right? It's just the structure of your economy. I mean, your economy is commodity driven. So 100 billion extra dollars translates into 20 billion tax money. That's a budget surplus, where it's all came first year and second year. I'm not sure, was there a budget surplus in third year? But that was delivered by Russia's war in Ukraine, believe it or not. I mean, but the reason I'm mentioning that, because it's just economics. I mean, this is not you can read it in newspapers. But it's important to keep this in mind, because when Norway made so much money from the sale of oil, Norway committed $15 billion to Ukraine.
It is about money, but it's also about personal relationships. And your work is, as an ambassador, and certainly the business of political leaders is. I want to read out, if I can, a couple of quotes. And again, these were in John Lyon's book, and they really stuck with me. When Putin was first made president in 2000, US President Bill Clinton looked hard into Boris Yeltsin's eyes and said, "I'm a little bit concerned about this young man that you've turned over the presidency to. He doesn't have democracy in his heart." George W. Bush was convinced of the special relationship. When asked if Putin was a man who America could trust, he replied, "I looked the man straight in the eye. I found him to be very straightforward. I was able to get a sense of his soul." Joe Biden described him in his memoir as ice-cold calm and told him, "I don't think you have a soul." Putin smiled at him and said, "We understand each other." Now, I think these three quotes are a brilliant example of the importance of individual relationships at the highest level. What's your worst fear of the way they are looking at the moment with the relationships that matter most to Ukraine?
That's a good question, because you see, the strength of Putin is that he's been running his country for 25 years. And you just now mentioned several presidents he met. And he's seen many other leaders of different countries, because he's been doing it for 25 years. And those guys that he dealt with in 2000 are long gone, retired. Some have died, and he's so strong because, he's always there. He's going to die in office. I mean, he can rule Russia for many, many years, and he will die in office. I mean, he will not die, in retirement. And he believes that democracy is weak. And he just makes, and democracy is in decline, actually. If you look at the countries who now support Ukraine, we are in a minority. It's only democracies which support Ukraine. And that's unfortunately true. And Putin got a point. He believes that, the world of liberal democracies is dead. It's a new post-liberal world with new players, with different rules, and where might is right. And if might is right, I mean, who cares about that UN Charter? I mean, it does work, because those who have nuclear weapons, they can do whatever they want. Because he threatened to use nuclear weapons many, many times. And this is what he said in his address in the middle of the night in February, 3 years ago. He said, "Well, don't you dare, or you will see the consequences that you'll never see in your life," basically referring to nuclear weapons he would deploy. But the thing is that it's a dangerous world now, with Iran and Israel. We'll see how it's going to play out, but it's certainly quite dangerous. And what else can happen in the region? And of course, relations between the leaders. But you see, there was an interesting story about Bush. You know how you can read it. It's fascinating, actually. I met Misha Ziger. So Misha Ziger reminded me of this story. He spoke at the University of Melbourne. I didn't agree with many things he said. So in Canberra, I really confronted him on some issues. But he reminded me a story of how Putin met Bush. So as you know, KGB people are very strong on psychological profiling of people. So they really get prepared meticulously for this kind of meetings. So he studied the psychological profile of Bush, and then he told him a story. And the story was like, George, I want to share with you a story about how I discovered God. There was that summer house that I have. It just burned down. Something happened there. And I got into that summer house. Everything was it was gone. But the only thing which survived was a cross on the wall. And I looked at that cross, and I saw God. And I embraced God into my life. And George Bush, listening to that story, like he fell in love with a guy. Mm. He said, wow. I mean, he believes in God. He's just like me. I discovered God. I stopped drinking alcohol, and that's my story. And therefore, when we kind of hear this story about, when Putin is a good man, he prayed for Donald Trump because he's his friend when he was shot at, and he commissioned such a beautiful portrait, and everybody was so moved by such a beautiful portrait, such a good man. And, this is just like anybody who studied Russia at any stage is like, Russia 101. This is just, Russian intelligence 101, or how to get you, interested. I mean, he used a dog against Angela Merkel. He knew that she's petrified of dogs, so he brought in his Labrador into the meeting, right? And do you know what he made Macron do? Oh, this is like a funny one. I mean, very humiliating. So Macron goes to see Putin. Well, he actually originally hosted Putin in Paris, as you remember, when he became a president. And he humiliated Putin there. In the joint press conference, he criticized Russia Today, called Russia Today a propagandist channel. So Putin paid him back. So Macron comes back, and they do a toast. And as you know, in Russia, there is only Russian champagne. French champagne in Russia is called sparkling wine. I mean, that was legislative changes. So all of a sudden, Putin gets this champagne, and he raises a toast to Macron. And guess what kind of champagne that was? That was Crimean champagne. And he had to drink that champagne in front of all the cameras. And that was like close up on that champagne. It was so powerful. He just said, well, firstly, there is only one champagne, it's Russian champagne, and you drink the champagne from the stolen factory and peninsula that we stole from Ukraine. And that was a moment, of truth. I don't know. I mean, that was like, apart from funding all the yellow gilets in France trying to undermine Macron, this is what Putin does. He loves it.
Our time is almost up. It's gone so fast. I do want to ask you, I guess, on a personal note too, to end, we began with it, that what it's like to be the ambassador through this. It's rare to have a sitting ambassador sit down with a live audience for an hour to answer anything. It's not the main game for you, obviously. How do you believe in this process that we're still meant to live in, of diplomacy, decency, democracy?
Look, it's a very good question, Sally. And let me tell you, I mean, I'll just do it personal because I think that's what matters. I really wanted this job, right? So I was in my business for 20 years. I was making good money, actually. I advised Google in Ukraine, advised Uber in Ukraine. I was a lobbyist. So I lobbied Ukrainian government on behalf of American, British, Swedish firms. And I was doing a good job, but I just got bored with that, I did it for 20 years, and there was no fun. And I always wanted to work for the government at a certain stage of my life. And being part of foreign affairs, so though, I was always part of foreign affairs, one way or another, either fighting Russian disinformation or running investment promotion campaigns for Ukraine or opening up new markets for businesses from Ukraine, different kinds of attracting investors. So I was always involved in foreign affairs one way or another, but always as part of civil society or as part of business. And then, I also spent a year in London studying international trade. And I always wanted to become an ambassador, at a certain stage, right? Several stages of that. And first time I wanted to become an ambassador when I was 33, and they told me, you're too young, that's not going to work, right? So 8 years later, when I became 40, I finally qualified, right? And said, okay, now you're old enough, right? I mean, I'm just exaggerating a bit, but that was pretty much kind of how it all happened, apart from, whatever I did, and they figured that maybe they could send me here because they wanted to freshen up their career service. They wanted people who think out of the box, who kind of are different, right? So for me, it's a mission. So I already are thinking, okay, what I'm going to do when I'm going back to Ukraine, right? So, and I've visited Ukraine 8 times. I'm going there in 2 days, again for 2 weeks to Ukraine, right? So I'm in Ukraine every 3 months, right? So I'm there very often. So I spend lots of time in Ukraine, and by the way, it's very important to keep that connection. Last year I was 3 times in Ukraine. This year I'm going now, and I will be back in August for annual ambassadors meeting, and then I'll be back again later this year for other things, right? So I already got 3 trips lined up to Ukraine in the next half a year. But for me, it's not about the job of an ambassador. I mean, I don't like when people call me Your Excellency. I think this is so old school, right? I want you to call me Billy Miller, that's my nickname here, because I'm not Your Excellency. I mean, I was a businessman, and of course it's nice and all of that, but it's not the reason why I do it, right? But it was just the whole thing is. So what is out there that I can achieve while being an ambassador here, right? What is out there that I can do? Which can create a legacy, right? And when I'm going to go back to Ukraine, because, I remember somebody, when I arrived here a half a year later, somebody asked me, actually in Melbourne, oh, Vasyl, you're staying here, right, after the job? I'm like, no, I'm not. So for some reason, people believe that I'm going to stay here. I probably could, right, if I wanted to. And I don't know how life is going to be. You never know what's going to happen. I may end up here, but it's not my goal, right? My actual goal is to go back to Ukraine and help companies from Australia and New Zealand to come and do business in Ukraine. That's what I want to do. Because I believe that's going to help Ukraine change, rebuild, and I will always be attached to Australia. And I really want to buy a house somewhere in Sydney, maybe Melbourne, and come here during, when it's very cold in Ukraine, and spend, your summer here, and my winter there. Why not, right? I think that's a good plan. And buy a boat somewhere there and just have that good, nice 3 months before I go back to Ukraine. It would be nice, right? When I'm 64 and, and all of that. But I don't know. I mean, it just, the whole point is that it's not, my goal is to really change the country, to be frank. I was involved so when I was a student, right? So when I was 20, or 19 actually, I teamed up with people who were actually on high school exchange program in the US. This is what I did when I was 15, right? So by the way, it was a life-changing experience for me. It changed me. I lived in a Pentecostal family, went to a Pentecostal church for a year in Tennessee. I really learned about evangelical America, by the way. I really understand Trump people. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
I was with them in church every 3 times per week. I read Bible. I never had a sip of wine in a year. And very nice people, right? Very religious, very decent, high integrity.
You were 16, though.
I was 15.
15. I'm glad you weren't drinking wine often.
Look, in Ukraine, I drank wine when I was 12. I mean, but the thing is, there in America, I didn't. So it's just, a different culture, different world. But it changed me. And then I came back from America, and it was 96. So it was only 5 years after Ukraine became independent. It was 97, actually. And I felt like, wow, what a country America is, right? And Ukraine was so poor. I will just give you an example. My both parents were medical doctors. My father was a neurologist. My mom was a GP. So the salary of my father was $20 per month. Same for my mom, right? So the poverty of the 90s was just enormous. That's when I realized I don't want to be a medical doctor, right?
Our time is up. Just before I go ahead and give our thanks, I do want to let you know that it is the end of the financial year, and the Wheeler Centre, like all arts groups, particularly since COVID, rely on donations and fundraising to bring the kind of programming that you see with the Fifth Estate and all the other incredible things that this centre puts on. There's nowhere like it. There's nowhere else like the Wheeler Centre anywhere in the world. And we're currently raising some funds for a new program in particular called Writing for Change, and it's to provide a platform for underrepresented writers. So if you're interested in giving a end of tax year donation, there is in fact a QR code behind me, or you can go to the website. And Maureen and Tony Wheeler, who are the patrons of the Wheeler Centre, like no others, have agreed with this particular drive that they're going to match every dollar that anybody gives. They will match it as well to keep that contribution. So thank you for letting me mention that. Back to you. What did you say your name is here? Billy
Miller.
Billy Miller. Can we please give our warmest thanks and best wishes to Billy Miller, and thanks to all of you tonight.